actual semen. And well, there's a couple of problems with that. First of all, we have other uses of that word by Paul, and he's not talking about semen. So Paul says in Galatians 3:16, he says, now to Abraham and his seed, sperma, were promises made. He said, not and to seeds as of many, but as of one, and to your seed, sperma, which is Christ. He's not talking about semen. He's talking about descendants. Right? In every single use of the word in Paul, he's talking about descendants. The word can mean semen, but if we go back to the Septuagint and we look at how it is used, 75% of its usages are in relation to descendants, lines of descent, lineage, 75%. Most of the others are references to seed as in seed of plants. Some of the others are references to semen, particularly in all those passages in Leviticus about nocturnal emissions and masturbation. So it can mean semen, but most of the time, in this sort of context, when it's saying the seed of such and such, in fact, pretty much all of the time when it's saying the seed of such and such, it's talking about descendants. So Carrier's translation is strained at best. And I think most people, when they look at it objectively, can see that it's contrived. But he has to do it. He has to do it because otherwise, here we have a reference in Paul to Paul talking about Jesus as a human descendant of a human being, kata saka, according to the flesh. And if he does that, the whole idea that Paul didn't believe in the historical Jesus collapses, and therefore a major plank of the entire mythicist argument falls apart. Because without Paul believing in the celestial Jesus, and without, say, something like the ascension of Isaiah, they've got fucking nothing. Can you see why I don't find this stuff convincing?
Well, there's certainly a reaction going on in the live chat.
I'll bet.
I think
I think you have a lot of fans out there. I mean, everybody in the live chat just loves you at the moment. They're just saying how much you're right on everything and so expert.
Yeah.
And okay, I can't pretend to any longer. It's hit or miss in the live chat right now.
Fine. Look, and the thing is, as I said before, people are emotionally invested in this stuff. And I actually don't care whether Jesus exists or not. But I do care about atheists making smart arguments that actually work. And that stuff just doesn't work. That Romans 1:3 thing is one of the silliest pieces of argument I've ever seen in a supposedly scholarly peer-reviewed book. I mean, it was laugh out loud stupid. And people who know this material, often say to me, what about the Romans 1:3 argument? It's like if you want to show someone exactly how bad this stuff is, you bring out the cosmic sperm bank in the sky. It's ridiculously bad. But of course, people who are emotionally invested in it like it.
I want to address one thing too, because I'm seeing this a lot, that they feel that you're bashing Carrier. And Steve, do you think that I don't see him bashing Carrier. I see him. No, not at all.
In fact, I have not seen him do a personal attack to Carrier yet. I mean, maybe questioning his methodological approach, his conclusions. And he actually said he thinks Richard is an intelligent guy. He's not like he's bashing on him personally.
He's a smart guy. He knows the material well. He's got great linguistic facility, but unfortunately, it's what you do with it. And my problem with him is that he is very creative in how he props up this argument. And if you really, really want him to be right, then you can kind of just sort of read it and think, yeah, that sounds plausible, until you actually dig down into it. And this is the other thing. Most people would not have the linguistic and academic background that I've developed and that many other people do have to be able to dig into that argument and see why it doesn't work. So most people would just read it and just think, oh, well, that makes sense.
Other than some of the theists that like Bart Ehrman and other people that have criticized Carrier, do you know of any other atheists that share your opinion of a caliber of a historian or along those lines, or how many of them actually are agreeing with you as far as your counter arguments to Carrier? Besides, obviously, some theists out there that I'm sure agreeing, and I know for a fact are.
Yeah. The first thing I think we need to make clear, and I want to say this in a way that people don't see it as a personal attack. Carrier is, let's just say, he's not a major figure in the field, right? So the idea that there are lots and lots of scholars out there who are paying lots of attention to his arguments, that's fantasy. He has a handful of peer-reviewed material, and he has never held an academic position since he graduated. He is effectively a blogger. So it's not like there are conferences where people are sitting around debating Richard Carrier's stuff. But there are some people who have paid attention to it in the way in which experts do pay attention to occasionally to fringe theories in their fields. And so people like R. Joseph Hoffman have countered it. The late Maurice Casey wrote a rather grumpy book on mythicism, where he basically said it was a load of bullshit. So they're aware of it. They just don't consider it to be important enough to actually counter. This is another reason why I do what I do, because unfortunately that means that the only people who are countering it are mainly Christian apologists, and so of course they're fairly easy to dismiss. This is why so many people say that I'm a Christian apologist, because that's a nice way that they can dismiss me without having to actually engage with what I'm saying, even though that's tough.
Yeah, I honestly find that to be disingenuous, and I get that the same thing. I pointed out to several atheists bad arguments you just should not be using, and they'll think that you're a theist apologist for doing that. It's like, no, if you stop using the bad arguments, means you're more likely to promote some of the good arguments if you want to go learn of them. Promoting a bad argument doesn't make you a better atheist.
Yeah, absolutely.
It makes you a bad person, throwing a bad argument around. So I get that. I understand.
So look, I would say, I've said it to you guys in the lead up to this show. If someone showed me a good mythicist argument that made it clear to me that a historical Jesus most likely didn't exist, I would happily accept it, because I don't care if the guy existed or not. And as Kyle was saying earlier on, it doesn't make any difference if he was a historical Jesus who wasn't what Christianity claims, or he was a non-historical Jesus who also wasn't what Christianity claims. The result is exactly the same. But the reason I am interested in this stuff is, first of all, I'm quite interested in the origins of Christianity. But secondly, I am interested in bad arguments. It's one of my hobbies. I collect bad historical arguments. And this is a bad historical argument. It's not the worst I've ever come across. And some people sort of say, it's a crackpot argument. No, forms of it are. But Carrier's thesis isn't a crackpot argument. It's just not very good. And a lot of it is sort of propped up with that kind of that cosmic sperm bank type of reasoning, which is, you really have to want to believe it in order to find that stuff convincing. But I think, as I said before, one of the reasons why people do get emotionally invested in mythicism is because they don't have any alternatives. Because the only alternative to mythicism for many people that is readily accessible is Christian apologist stuff that says not just that he existed, but also that he walked on water, rose from the dead, and was the second person of the Trinity in God in human form. So what I'd like to do is, as quickly as I can, kind of elaborate on what it is that non-Christian scholars, including all those Jewish scholars and people like Bart Ehrman and people like Paul Fredrickson and people like, there's a pile of them, Gerd Ludemann, who believe that there was a historical Jesus. They just don't believe that he was the Jesus of Christianity. He was a Jewish preacher. And I want to sort of explain the context that helps us to understand why they believe that. So if you bear with me, I just want to maybe sort of paint a bit of a historical picture. If you imagine for a moment, if you imagine that you were a first century Jewish peasant living in Galilee, your life would be pretty hard. We know from the archaeology that your life would consist of subsistence level farming, and you would be having a lot of trouble, probably at any given time, even in a good year, scraping together a living for you and your family. One of the reasons why life would be so hard is that you had to give about 1/3 of your production in taxes. Now, I pay about 1/3 or more, actually, of my income in taxes. But that's because I live in Australia, and so I get things like a modern state, so I get things like roads and schools and hospitals, and because I don't live in the United States, I get universal healthcare. So I get a lot of stuff back from my taxes. A Jewish peasant living in Galilee would only get one thing back from their taxes, and that's not being killed for not paying his taxes. The reason that he had to pay so much in tax was that, first of all, he had to support the lifestyle of the guy who ruled Galilee. That was Herod Antipas, one of the sons of Herod the Great. But Herod Antipas, in turn, had to pass an enormous cut of his tax revenue onto the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire in this period was effectively running a kind of a protection racket, particularly in the Eastern Mediterranean. So what they were doing was they were basically saying, well, you can rule, to people like Herod, you can rule your areas, you administer it for us, you keep the peace there, otherwise we'll come and intervene. In return, though, what we'll do is we will protect you from, say, the Parthian Empire, which was to the east. So if they invade, we'll come and help you. But also what you get to do is you get to give us a large chunk of your revenue. This is a pretty sweet deal for the Roman Empire because it meant they didn't have to actually administer large areas of the Eastern Mediterranean. These client kings or puppet kings like Herod Antipas did it for them. So all the images that you see in Bible movies of Jesus preaching in Galilee and Roman soldiers standing around in every street corner didn't happen. The Romans didn't garrison Galilee at all until after the Jewish revolt.
But they were there in case they were needed.
Yeah,
this wasn't like an extortion thing. It wasn't like an extortion thing. It was just they were. It wasn't like an extortion thing, a protective ring. Okay, but they weren't there with continual presence, though. Correct?
No, they didn't need to be, and it was in their interest not to be because the Roman army was actually in this period was actually relatively small. It was only about a couple of 100,000 men, but they were just placed. One, they were very good, but two, they were placed in highly strategic places. So in the province of Syria, which Galilee was officially part of, the Roman troops were up in Antioch, several days' march to the north, where they were protecting the Eastern Roman Empire from those Persians and the Parthian Empire. There would have been a small body of Roman troops in Caesarea because the Romans did administer Judea, which was south of Galilee, directly. So they did have their own prefect there. That's who Pontius Pilate was. He was a prefect. He was a subordinate of the governor of Syria, and he couldn't command legionary troops because he wasn't high enough ranking. He only commanded auxiliary troops. So the only Roman troops that were around in Jesus' time were not actually Romans at all. They were actually auxiliaries, and they would have been mainly Samaritans and Greek-speaking Syrians. So that Passion of the Christ movie that Mel Gibson made a few years ago, we had Romans speaking Latin. The Romans who were involved in any crucifixion of Jesus would have spoken Greek or Syriac, not Latin, and they weren't Romans. They were from local area. They were second-rank troops. That's beside the point. So, so basically, what you've got in your with your Jewish peasant is he's not happy because he's living in a fairly tough environment where he's oppressed politically. But he's also not happy because he's a devout Jew. So he believes, if he's a devout Jew, he believes that he is one of the chosen people of God, and he's living in the promised land. But the problem is, if he's a chosen member of the chosen people of God and he's living in the promised land, why is he being oppressed by Romans? And why have the Jews been oppressed by pretty much fucking everyone for hundreds of years? The Jews have been conquered, by this stage, have been conquered by the Assyrians, and then the Babylonians, and then the Persians, and then the Greeks, the Macedonian Greeks, and then they were dominated by the sub-kingdoms of Alexander the Great, of the Ptolemies, and then the Seleucids, and then there was a brief period of independence under the Hasmoneans, and then the Romans. So basically, our first century Jew is sitting there thinking, why is this happening to me? Why is life so bad?
Is there something to be said for the fact that Jews of all people would have a vested interest in determining whether Christ was a myth, right? I mean, they don't even go around with mythicism, right? I mean, is there something to be